If you were with us last week, you'll know that I offered a meditation that encouraged us all during this very strange time of COVID-19, the coronavirus, to embrace the shake, which is to say we're all suffering certain restrictions and limitations right now. And there is, of course, opportunities when you're restricted or limited. I myself am going to do this in the sermon this morning and do something really quite different, embrace the shake of the moment, by doing something that fellow brothers and sisters in Christ have done down through Christian history. There's a mode of speaking. There's a tradition in the Christian faith. I don't know where it began. I know that Tolstoy played with it. I know that C.S. Lewis played with it even more famously in his book called The Screwtape Letters, of encouraging us to look at our present lives very, very differently, to kind of pull back the covers on what you usually see by looking at it from perspective of below, of how Satan or how Satan's workers would actually look at things going on earth, and how they might want to trip us up, and how they might want to ruin our lives in some kind of way. And so C.S. Lewis imagined that there was an uncle who worked down below for their master, of course, who was the devil. And he would send letters to his nephew Screwtape, encouraging him about how he could trip up his projects, which, of course, were human beings, people being led to the faith, people already in the faith. And so I imagine this past week that I intercepted a letter from Screwtape that he was sending to his nephew Wormwood. And I'd like to share this letter I intercepted with you right now. And it's really my hope and prayer that this would give us a perspective on what's going on right now that would encourage us to stay strong and to stay true to our Lord. So listen to this letter intercepted from Screwtape to Wormwood. Dear Wormwood, mid-March, with the onset of spring in the world above, is such a wretched time, isn't it? Blue skies, bright days, early sunrises, budding trees, children playing outside, the melodious singing of songbirds. Yuck! All reminders of the enemy's magnificent victory on that third day, built right into the structure of terrestrial time. What an advantage the loathsome maker of all has over us. And yet, for all his filthy advantages, we are doing a respectable job of it today, I would say, especially in what the human vermin call the Western world, or as we like to call it, the decadent place, or, increasingly ours. It somewhat pains me, nephew, to need to do this, but I must actually begin this letter with a little praise of you and your team. It's such an awful action, recounting another's successes, but I guess necessary to keep you all on the right track and faithfully in the foul one's service. Your recent efforts have been laudable, and they've been laudable because while it is true that the enemy really does, oh how unimaginably, but really does consider the human animals to be his children, objects of love and dignity, whom he wants to be gathered together into one big global family, and ultimately, if grace melts them, an eternal family in his presence. Although all of this is true, you have well followed the directives of our Father below. To be sure, you've managed on wide scales to get the talking beasts thinking about each other, not first and foremost as fellow creatures under God, which they are, but primarily as members of competing groups, collections of variously valued peoples, some greater and some lesser than others, some superior, some inferior, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, Canadians and Americans, Asians and non-Asians, rich and poor, men and women, young and old, and even, and wasn't this a wonderful triumph, Ford lovers versus GMC lovers. And by the way, I heard the bumper sticker portraying a Ford lover urinating on a GMC logo was your friend Sultan's idea. Congratulate him for me. This technique is ancient and effective. Contempt veiled as humor. It was the preferred technique offered to Ishmael with Isaac, remember, and was working fabulously until Mother Sarah saw through it. Yes, the one drawback of having a mother in her 90s, this technique does not work with those who've had so much life experience or with the pure in heart. In any event, I digress. What I was saying, Wormwood, is that you and your team should be commended for the recent successes at dividing humanity up along collective identity lines. The us and them mentality that has resulted in many places, and usually well beneath their radar, is precisely what we're aiming for. For although they think they love others and tell themselves that they're great lovers of humanity, it's usually nothing more than self-flattery. And need I remind you that these creatures are particularly susceptible to this? They think they love others. They say they love others, but they reveal their true selves when they actually have to do something to show that love to others, whom they do not consider a member of their own group or family, or whom they don't particularly like. It's amazing how quickly they act in a me first or us first kind of way. The selfishness becomes palpable. To be honest, dear nephew, I've been cackling and laughing myself into a devilishly good mood throughout the entirety of this past week with the fallout of Covid-19, as they are calling it, or pandemonium dust, as we're more accurately calling it. Scrambling like terrified animals, they've been rushing into the supermarkets and grocery stores and filling their own buggies and leaving nothing for others, or wanting to rake them with inflated prices. It's delicious, isn't it, Wormwood? Can't stop smacking my lips. Positively beautiful in our kind of way. You see a similar thing even on national scales. Countries will do what's best for themselves, regardless of the pain it might inflict on other smaller and more vulnerable places. I mean, I see their dilemma, but can you see me rubbing my hands? In any event, I'm wanting to keep this present letter short, Wormwood. After all, you know how our Father below is an infernal penny pincher, a miser who's directing us to write in smaller and smaller script so as to save, as he says, precious paper. And no, Wormwood, the 3 billion stacks of stockpiles we do have doesn't dampen his inextinguishable tight-fistedness. He's always fearing scarcity. And rightly, you know, because nothing properly belongs to him and he can't create ex nihilo like the enemy above, out of nothing, just by speaking. Another unfair advantage of the enemy, I might add. Nonetheless, let me keep this short. Here are the directives we've received from our Father below so that all of you working the beat might make the most of the present opportunity with the global pandemic, with its global panic. And let me remind you, nephew, before relaying these directives from our supreme leader, some of his directives may sound a bit strange, but do not forget that our Father below has been around for a very, very long time, longer than any human ever, except if you include the truly human one, but let's not mention that name. The point is, our Father has gotten to know the human creature spectacularly well, better than they know themselves. So you're wise to heed his advice very closely. Here's what he's recommending to you and yours in his service with reference to the human vermin in the present global crisis. First, capitalize on the mounting fear. Human fear to us is a wonderful gift, and at present there is a glorious surplus of it. It enables us to control all but the most developed of them, and with spectacular ease. You'll remember that the enemy above, nephew, their heavenly Father, has taught them that, quote, perfect love casts out fear. A frightful reality, which is why we do everything we can to kill love. But our Father below wants us to know that the obverse is also true. That, quote, perfect fear casts out love. Which is why we must do all that we can to foster fear as much as possible. And yes, nephew, it is true that we were never able to lead the truly human one, that despicable Nazarene, into fear, even as he approached the device, which is why he always acted in love. But with the others, we can always do it with the right techniques. And presently, as I've already said, the human rats are already running scared, and so our job is extra easy. We need only blow on that fear a bit to capitalize on it. So blow away, wormy, blow away. But you must realize, nephew, I should add, that it would be easy for you to go wrong here in assuming that the creatures are all afraid of the same thing. They are not. And understandably, they've mostly been told that those who are at risk, or most at risk, are the elderly and those who've got other health problems. Thus, while the old and unhealthy may be fearing sickness and death, many others are fearing other things, a lack of supplies, as we've already mentioned, or lost experiences in the present time, as with, for example, all of those young people who are supposedly entitled to have a blast at spring break. And what you must do, Wormwood, then, is play on their fear so love is cast out. Keep those fearing death focused exclusively on the terrors of death, so they do not realize the opportunity to pray and minister to others about them. Keep those fearing a lack of supplies listening only to reports of more hardships to come. This will keep them thinking that they need to stockpile more, even if it means there's not enough for others. And you can help them justify this hoarding behavior, by the way, by introducing the thought that everyone else is doing it too. This is never a justification, of course, acceptable to their Father above, but it works on the human pests 90% of the time, I'm glad to say. And for those young people afraid of missing out, play on their self-pity while aggravating their fear of just how much they stand to lose if they sacrifice for others. Enable them to go out and revel together despite warnings of putting others at risk, by reminding them how the old and frail will die anyways and are a weight on the economy, and how they will probably be happier once they're gone anyways. Perfect love casts out fear, nephew, but happily for us, perfect fear also casts out love. Therefore, fan fear into a flame. Second, our Father below wants us to work extra hard drilling home a rather simple idea into the heads of the earthlings. The idea that the present moment with COVID-19 is unique, extraordinary, exceptional, unnatural. As much as possible, Wormwood, ensure the media especially is abuzz with these sorts of words so that everyone whose ear is pressed to the radio or TV or online feed, which is most of them, is overwhelmed with the feeling of how extraordinary and odd and unnatural is the present moment. Have them repeat it repeatedly. Now, it is a bit odd, of course, and it is a bit extraordinary, of course, but only in superficial ways. You see, slimy nephew, our aim is to keep them from thinking too much and seeing the deeper truth in the present moment. The truth that the present moment is not really that unique, because while people will die now due to the virus, the bigger truth is that all of them, all the sons and daughters of Adam, will die. 100% of them, and soon now. Yes, there's a war going on, but there's always a war going on. Also keep them from seeing the deeper truth that the present moment is not really that unique because, yes, although it is true that there is much at stake and much to fear for them now, the deeper truth is that there is always even more at stake. Death beyond physical death, for example, separation from life itself. And there's always more to fear than they dare to fear, namely the one in whom fearing is wisdom itself and salvation. But our job, let me remind you and underscore here, Wormwood, is to prevent them from having such realizations by encouraging them to comfort themselves with the idea that everything that's going on is unique, exceptional. Because if they do begin to realize that the present situation is not that unique and exceptional, but that it only exposes the reality of what is true in an even deeper sense, well, then they might turn to him and be saved, not just from COVID-19, but from death and hell itself. And you know the consequences for you and me if we allow that to happen. For oh, how the serpentine one gets when we lose souls. You do remember the last time, don't you? Oh, and one more thing, nephew, in line with this second directive. I have received reports that some of you have been trying to scare your projects by whispering to them about an absence of vaccines or the terrible long time it will take to produce them. You need to be far smarter here, nephew, far smarter. Do not use the word vaccine at all or anything like it. Because you see, Wormwood, you get them thinking about vaccines or healing agents, and then this can set off a chain of thinking that will probably not end well. Because first they think about vaccines, and then they think about the strange reality that there are such things as vaccines in the world they live in, along with balms for sores and healing agents for colds and miraculous potions for deeper wounds. And before you know it, they're wondering if this can be a general principle implanted into the universe itself, that where there are sicknesses, there are also things that can heal those sicknesses. And perhaps then, dangerously, they start asking the most dangerous question of all, which is whether there might be a solution to the deepest problem of all, which is the corrupted and perverse human heart, along with the problem of death And that might lead them to the final solution. You know who? To the Prince of Peace, our final dissolution. Third and finally, Wormwood, as it pertains to church folk in particular, to the sheep, to the so-called saints, because of that Nazarene, our Father below tells us that you have a shining, unseen opportunity here. Notice, he says, how pastors and leaders of churches are working feverishly hard to use technology to provide faith care in online services so the community of the saved can still meet together and worship together and receive his means of grace. Well, says our master, we need to bend this holy innovating of theirs to our advantage, as always with technology, always to our advantage. And here's some tips about how to do that presently. First, when they are taking in services online, behind a screen, get them in a critical mood. Watching screens naturally involves a critical mood and invites a critical mood. So get them focused not on what is being said or what is being sung, but get them fixated on the voice of the singer or the posture of the preacher or the oddness of worshiping like this at all. And encourage them to gripe about it, please, and how it could be done so much better if only they did this or that. Second, distract them. Make sure their iPhones are on and beeping at just the right times. Or suggest into their minds that baking a cake and worshiping at the same time is a fabulous idea. Distraction should be far easier at this time given no one's watching what they're doing. So maximize efforts to distract. Third, get the people watching from the comforts of their own homes at home to love it. Get them to love it. To absolutely love it, even more than they like going to normal embodied services. Whisper into their ears about how convenient this is going to church online from the comforts of our own homes. So convenient, so wonderfully convenient. How they can wake up when they want to, how they can take the service in while eating breakfast or lunch, how they can criticize out loud to each other right in the moment instead of needing to remember their criticisms and recalling them for sharing with friends later. Also pamper them, Wormwood, with the warm feeling about how wonderful it is that they can screen out people they don't like from their services and invite over all the people they very much do like. How they can fast forward through the bad songs or bad sermons or bad moments. Oh yes, impress on them, dear nephew, all of these things, the convenience and the loveliness of it all. For if you can do this enough, our Father below says it will in some instances mean victory for us. Because when things return to normal, there will now feel for many to be a new normal. And this new normal will be the favored option. One more disembodied thing will be preferred by them than living out their embodiment with other people. And you know the spectacular victory this has been for us wherever it has manifested. Remember, Wormwood, we hate bodies. Bodies were the enemy's idea. Now, I must let you go, Wormwood. There are murmurings coming up from below, just coming to me that Snodgrass and his team are going to be severely punished, and I don't want to miss the bonfire and branding. Apparently, one of the team members there came up to a frightened atheist husband who was watching his wife give birth in the labor and delivery room in a hospital inundated with many dying because of the COVID-19 virus. And one of Snodgrass's men tried to blow on this man's fear by playing on his dislike of blood. But he chose to whisper just as the child was emerging, healthy, wet, and full of the blessed mystery of life. And the target shot from fear to love in a nanosecond. And then he shot through the mess of the moment to its outstripping beauty. Not for himself, but just the utter beauty of it completely grabbed him. And the whole scene moved this atheist beyond his atheism. He now tilts strongly toward the enemy's camp. In any event, nephew, I smell the sizzle of flesh. Off I go. Until next time, your uncle, Screwtape.